Welcome to episode 3 of Chronicles of Dentistry, the Knotty Neck. I'm Dr. Preeti and I'm your personal guide for all those dentistry related problems. So let's get started with our episode 3, and today we'll be doing triangles of neck. Today we'll be starting off with notes making. In previous episodes, what we did is we just did the topic first and then I showed you how you have to make notes. But today we'll be starting off with notes making. First, take a sheet of paper or your register and divide that sheet into two halves. In the upper section, you will be drawing a full-fledged neck in which you will be showing all the triangles of neck. And in the lower section, I'll tell you later what you have to write. So let's start with the upper section first. First, draw a jaw and below that jaw, start making your neck area. Now look at this picture. As you can see that there is this strong oblique muscle which is coming out from the posterior portion of your mandible and going and attaching towards your sternum. And it's actually dividing into two parts. This strong muscle is called sternocleidomastoid muscle. And this sternocleidomastoid is actually dividing your neck into anterior and posterior halves. So first, let's discuss about sternocleidomastoid only. Why is it named sternocleidomastoid? So it's coming out of sternum. It has two heads. One is coming out from sternum, other is coming out from the clavicular area. And it attaches to the medial 1/3 of the clavicle. So sterno from sternum, cleido from clavicular, and it runs obliquely and get attached to the mastoid process. Hence, name sternocleidomastoid. So just draw a sternum and clavicle, make two heads of sternocleidomastoid and attach it to the mastoid process. So what is the use of sternocleidomastoid? It actually helps you bend your neck and tilt your head. So what will happen if it gets spasm? If sternocleidomastoid muscle gets into spasm, then the right side of spasm muscle will tilt your head towards the left and your chin will actually turn towards the right, and vice versa for the other side. So take it as that sternocleidomastoid is used for bending, and if it's in spasm, you can't bend it. So the anterior-most border of sternocleidomastoid marks the posterior outline of the anterior triangles, and posterior border marks the anterior border of posterior triangles. Most of the triangles you can actually learn from the side, but just the submental triangle you have to learn it from the front view. So we'll start with digastric one, that's why. So the digastric triangle is actually in the submandibular region where submandibular gland is present. So in this diagram only, just write few things in the bracket. That the anterior border, that is anterior-inferiorly, it is bounded by anterior belly of digastric. Posterior-inferiorly, that is the posterior border, is bounded by posterior belly of digastric. Superiorly or base is actually made of base of mandible. And floor is made up of mylohyoid plus hyoglossus muscle. Now imagine that you are standing in this digastric triangle and your face should be in the superior area, that is towards the base of the mandible. Now what is your floor? That is the mylohyoid or hyoglossus. What is superior or base? It is base of mandible. What is inferiorly? There are two inferiors, anterior inferior and posterior inferior. The right one, that is anterior, is anterior belly of digastric, and posterior inferior is posterior belly of digastric. So you're done with digastric triangle. Now we'll do submental triangle. So let's see the front view of your neck. So imagine that you're lifting your chin and then you're seeing submental triangle. So for this we need to know what is the attachment of anterior and posterior belly of digastric. So the anterior belly of digastric is attached towards the midline of the face. That is, there are two digastrics, one on left side, one on right side, and two bellies, anterior and posterior. So there are two anterior bellies, right one and left one, which are attaching to the mandible near the midline, and the other end is attached to the hyoid bone, and from hyoid bone There is posterior belly of digastric which is emerging and getting attached to the mastoid process near the temporal part. So now imagine that you are standing facing the mandible. So base becomes your hyoid bone and anterior belly of digastrics become your right and left border, that is anterior and posterior borders. And what is the floor here? Mylohyoid muscle is the floor here. And just at the midline near the junction of anterior bellies, there are submental lymph nodes which are content of submental triangle. So till now what all you have drawn? One sternocleidomastoid, anterior posterior belly of digastric which is attached to the hyoid bone in the middle. And now draw a thyroid and cricoid cartilage and pass a small muscle longitudinally and attach it to the sternocleidomastoid. This muscle is superior belly of omohyoid. It is dividing your muscular and carotid triangle. So we'll first do muscular triangle. So what are the borders? As you can see that it is starting off from hyoid bone. Just stand facing the fascia of the neck. So it will be your anterior border and there are two posterior borders. Posterior superiorly there is superior belly of omohyoid and posterior inferiorly there is the sternal part of sternocleidomastoid. That too the anterior border of sternocleidomastoid. As for the floor, intrahyoid muscles make the floor of muscular triangle. So what are the infrahyoid muscles? Sternohyoid, omohyoid, sternothyroid and thyrohyoid. And what is the content? Ansa cervicalis is the one which actually supplies your infrahyoid muscles. So muscular triangle's content should be ansa cervicalis only. Now we'll come to the most important part, that is the carotid triangle. So now stand inside the carotid triangle and face towards the front. What is the anterior superior portion? It would be the anterior belly of digastric. Anterior inferior border is superior belly of omohyoid and the posterior border is your anterior border of sternocleidomastoid. As for the floor, there are three main important muscles. First is middle constrictor, inferior constrictor and thyrohyoid membrane. As for the nodes, I would say that apart from all the triangles, just carotid triangle you should draw it somewhere else or maybe in the lower portion of your page because it is the most important triangles of your neck. So now let's start with the contents. There are three main content: arteries, veins and nerves. You all must have learnt about carotid sheath. This carotid sheath is one of the content of your carotid triangle. So in carotid sheath there are three things. One is vagus nerve, internal jugular vein and common carotid artery. Anteriorly, this carotid sheath is embedded by ansa cervicalis and posteriorly by sympathetic trunk. Now let's come to the contents of carotid triangle. In arteries, write three arteries: external carotid, common carotid and internal carotid. In external carotid, all the three anterior branches are involved, that is the facial artery, lingual artery and superior thyroid artery. One medial artery, that is ascending pharyngeal, is involved. Amongst the two posterior arteries, that is between occipital and posterior auricular, only occipital is there. An internal jugular vein, common facial vein, pharyngeal vein and lingual vein is there. As for nerves, vagus nerve, accessory nerve, superior laryngeal nerve, and in superior laryngeal there are two branches, that is external and internal laryngeal nerves which are involved, and the superior laryngeal is itself is a branch of vagus nerve, hypoglossal nerve and sympathetic trunk. These are the actual content of your carotid triangle. Now let's come to the posterior triangles of neck. In posterior triangles of neck, there are two triangles, occipital and supraclavicular. This triangle is actually divided into two by inferior belly of omohyoid. So the one which is near the clavicle is called supraclavicular or subclavian, and one which is near occipital bone is called occipital triangle. Borders are same, just the lower and upper portion is different. Posteriorly, anterior border of trapezius, anteriorly posterior border of sternocleidomastoid, and this inferior belly of omohyoid makes the floor of occipital triangle or base, and Upper base for subclavian triangle. The roof is actually made by the investing layer of deep cervical fascia, and floor is made by three muscles: splenus capitis, levator scapulae, and scalenus medius. As for contents, in occipital triangle, nerves are the branches of cervical plexus, and in subclavian triangle, these are the branches of branchial plexus. So the nerves of occipital triangle are spinal accessory, forecutaneous of cervical plexus, that is lesser occipital, greater auricular, anterior cutaneous, and supraclavicular, and the muscular branches. For subclavian, nerves are BSSS, yani BSSS. It's branchial plexus, roots of trunk, nerve to serratus anterior, nerve to subclavius, and suprascapular nerve. As for vessels, in occipital triangle, occipital artery and transverse cervical artery and veins are there. And for subclavian triangle, third part of subclavian artery and vein, and suprascapular artery and vein is there. So yeah, you're done with your triangles of neck. Now let's jump to quiz section. Roof of digastric triangle is formed by all except skin, deep fascia, platysma, mylohyoid. So the answer is mylohyoid. Mylohyoid forms the floor, not the roof. Roof is formed by deep fascia, skin, and platysma. Your next question. All of the following are subdivisions of anterior triangle except carotid, digastric, muscular, supraclavicular. Its straight answer, supraclavicular, because supraclavicular is the posterior triangle's part. Next question. Muscles forming boundaries of carotid triangle are all except sternocleidomastoid, superior belly of omohyoid, posterior belly of digastric, and inferior belly of omohyoid. So the answer is yes, inferior belly of omohyoid. It is the part of posterior triangle, not the anterior triangle, and carotid triangle is anterior triangle. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. See you next time. Until then, keep reading, keep studying, and do lots and lots of MCQs. All the very best.